Please listen carefully.
Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Elements of Whisky. Today we are recording in English because we have a very, very special guest, Sarah Kennedy, calling in from Belfast to talk to us about McConnell's Irish whiskey. However, there were some small hiccups during recording in both audio and visual input. We think you can still enjoy the episode even though there are a few small hiccups. And we hope to soon visit Belfast and talk to Sarah face to face. But for the time being, enjoy this episode. Every good story starts with a question. Who, what, where, when, or why. But we answer the most important question in our podcast, which is whiskey. And today we've got Sarah Kennedy from Irish whiskey brand McConnell's here with us to answer that question. Hi Sarah, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, can you tell us something about yourself?
Yes, of course. So my name's Sarah. I'm from Belfast and I grew up in Belfast. So McConnell's Irish Whiskey is a Belfast Irish whiskey brand. So I'm very excited to be working for an Irish whiskey brand that is from my home city. Yeah, I'm 29. I've worked in the industry for just a year now, which means I'm pretty fresh to the industry. And also I went to university here and I worked in bars and restaurants in Belfast City. So whiskey has always been a massive passion of mine.
Okay. And how did you get to become a whiskey ambassador? Because that's your role at McConnell's, right?
Yeah. So the whiskey brand ambassador is something that, it's been around for a long time. Some of the larger brands had whiskey brand ambassadors all across the world. But relatively new in terms of Irish whiskey because Irish whiskey has come back in a massive way. So becoming a whiskey brand ambassador was something that I never thought that I would do, and it was an opportunity that came to me by fluke, really. I studied marketing and business in university, and then after that I went into a more corporate environment and a financial background, really, which is very far removed from working as a whiskey brand ambassador.
Yes.
But the field of work that I was in, you do learn about a number of industries and you learn about the different professions and you go into detail about them. So with the industry, Irish whiskey industry and the distilleries growing and booming in Ireland, there was just a lot of opportunity to go to new events, tasting events, trade shows, places like Whiskey Live. And I was actually invited through work to these trade shows, and I went to the McConnell's Irish Whiskey launch back in February 2020, and I met a number of the people who were behind the project of McConnell's. They loved my enthusiasm. They thought it was a fresh way of looking at Irish whiskey. I hadn't worked for any other brands before. And also I had a massive passion and love for Belfast and the change in Belfast and how our city has become a lot more positive in recent years. So from there, I was offered a job a few months later to become the Irish Whiskey brand ambassador. And I jumped at the chance, basically. I loved it. I was very excited.
So you got the job just offered like that to you?
It wasn't really. It was a long process.
It was a longer process. Okay.
Yeah. So I give you the short version. It was a longer process. They contacted me a few months later. They knew that they needed someone on the ground in Belfast. McConnell's and Irish whiskey are very attractive in other markets. So if you go to America or Australia, or if you travel to Canada or mainland Europe, it's starting to grow. It's starting to grow in China. All of these countries are really excited about Irish whiskey, but the home market is something that is very competitive because there's a lot of Irish whiskey brands that are being launched and released. So they needed someone from Belfast who knew Belfast City and who had the experience with working in the hospitality industry in Belfast. And And they also wanted someone who was interested in Irish whiskey too. So they saw an opportunity to speak to me as someone who's fresh to the industry. Now there was a lot of interview processes, and I had to tell them more about myself and whether or not I was interested in changing my career path also, because I'd worked incredibly hard. I'd done obviously my degree and a number of other qualifications and diplomas for about 7 years. I'd been working in the industry that I was in, so that was a real risky move for me too, because it was very, very new. But at the time I was just turned 28, and I thought that if I'm ever going to do that, it will be now. I have to make that move now, and this opportunity isn't going to come around again. And it's not an opportunity that I regret taking. I absolutely love my job, so very excited about it.
All right. I'm going to take this opportunity then to grab the bottle of McConnell's that we've got over here and pour myself a little bit. Oh, you've got your own bottle. Very
got
good.
Mine
very
too.
Good.
I do love whenever you open the whiskey and it makes that sound.
Yeah, so do we.
It's interesting because I have a lot of fancy McConnell's Irish whiskey glasses, but a lot of the stuff that I get personally, I end up giving away to family and friends. So I don't actually have a McConnell's glass with me.
So I'm the only one here with a proper McConnell's glass. Hey, these glasses are different from the ones that we usually use. What kind of glass is this?
So this is the Tua tasting glass. It's an Irish whiskey tasting glass. Mm-hmm. You've probably seen the Glencairn glass, which is the Scottish our whiskey tasting glass. But the lady who owns this company, a girl called Rosie, and she is a lovely girl. And those glasses are just, I think, absolutely stunning. They're so intricate. They're quite feminine too, which I quite like. And then the logo, the gold logo on the glass, I think just works really, really well with the shape of the glass.
Well, we'll upload a picture of the glasses on our Facebook and Instagram so that our audience can see indeed the beautiful gold logo of McConnell's Irish whiskey on it. I like it very much. It's a bit bigger. I just realized that I poured myself a lot more whiskey than I usually do. So this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it holds a lot of whiskey in that glass.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
And the first thing you notice obviously is the color.
Very light.
Yeah,
very golden.
It's a golden color. It is very appetizing color. You know, It's not too light. Sometimes with a really, really dark whiskey, it can be slightly intimidating. But I do think it's a great color, and it also comes through well whenever you add a little bit of water. It's not too light either.
It smells it's very friendly smelling. You know what I mean? There's sometimes you smell a whiskey and you're like, ugh, that's not a nice smell. Or you have to get through different layers, but this is very fruity. It's very
it's ripe fruits, which I think is something that is always inviting. So if you have ripe melon, you know, when you slice melon and you kind of come back to it, it smells like that. It's also got vanilla notes on it too. You can taste the malt ratio, or you can smell the malt ratio on it, that there is like a biscuity note there, but as well. It is 42%, so there's a higher ABV on this than there is on some of the other blended Irish whiskies. But you don't really get that on the nose. It's not incredibly alcoholic, or you don't get ethanol as soon as you nose it.
No, that's that. Sometimes we try these cask strength whiskies, which you smell indeed, and you're just like, oh, that's happening, and you have to get through that. And this is not like that at all. It's indeed fruity. It's a bit malty. There's the vanilla. There's the a bit spicy as well, I think.
Yeah.
It's
so that is it. It's intriguing. It's something that is it's not incredibly complex. So when you're trying to decipher the notes, you can identify them, but also it's not too simple, where you're just getting some of the, like at the bourbon casks, you get a lot of vanilla notes from bourbon whiskey. Naturally. You get woody notes, you know, you usually get the citrus notes, but there's a bit more complexity to this whiskey.
I think so. I'm gonna have my.
If anyone as well wants to reach out to me directly on it, and because I have Instagram and Facebook, I don't mind people sending me messages about, you know, what they get from the whiskey, if there's anything else, because it's interesting. Whiskey is very subjective. It's not something that everybody gets the same thing, because there is no sugar added to whiskey, and you know, it's memories that you're getting.
Yeah.
So people get things like butterscotch if they would have had butterscotch sweets as children. Other people would get like a demerara sugar. People get the malted biscuit, but not everybody gets the same notes from the whiskey. So we'll move on to the palate.
Oh my god, it is. I love it. This is an amazing whiskey. I mean, I have tried like a sip before from Max, a tiny sip because I had to drive. But this is, my god,
Yeah,
so sweet. And so, it reminds me of, I can't come up with the word right now, but this nice vanilla candy that I like very soft and squishy. Fudge. Vanilla fudge.
yes, it is very like fudge. I actually, at my sister's wedding, I did the wedding favors, and I paired it with a Belfast like all butter fudge, and it worked so well with it. Almost a buttery fudge, like it fills your mouth, and it's also got a great texture. It's velvety on your palate.
Yeah, it's very soft.
And the interesting thing that you had mentioned is that it does have a spiciness as well.
Yeah.
You know, the longer it stays on your palate, you realize that it has a peppery note. It draws out longer on your palate. It's not like a clove spice or a cinnamon spice. It's more a peppery spice. A lot of people also get banana, like sugary banana, dried banana chips.
You mean like the candies?
Yeah, you know when you get the dried banana in a pack.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Max also likes to say it tastes like banana bread. And now he has a long, loving history with banana bread. So that's a good thing. He'll recognize that anywhere, I think. Mm-hmm.
And it's the honey note that you get from banana bread too is that's what I get.
So I read a bit up on the whiskey itself. You already said it was a blend. It's a malt and grain whiskey blend, I believe.
So it's a split between malted whiskey and grain whiskey. There is a higher malt content to the whiskey than what usually would be on the market. Okay. And also, as I said before, it's 42% ABV, so it's slightly higher alcohol content. And one of the more interesting things about our blend is that we put an age statement on it, and not many blended Irish whiskies have an age statement. So it's a 5-year-old whiskey, and it will always be a 5-year-old whiskey. Even, you know, in the future, it's our consistent blend. It will always have a 5-year-old age statement, which people ask me at times and sometimes get it confused with a single malt because it has an age statement.
That's indeed something you don't see too often on blended whiskies. Why have you chosen, or why has McConnell's chosen to put an age statement on the bottle? It's
one of those things that if you are aging a whiskey and it has to be aged for at least 3 years, to give it that wee bit of an extra, you know, stamp on it, to give us a bit more of an identity, and also you're getting a little bit more when you're buying the bottle. So, and it's to also add some consistency too, because a lot of blends would be a mixture between 3-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and some of them even 10-year-olds, you know, and all the liquid is different. Whereas we know that the youngest liquid in this bottle is 5 years old.
And what can you tell us about the history of McConnell's? Because it has quite a rich history, I think. It was opened and it was closed down, and so many things happened. It survived disasters, you could say, in a certain way. It was originally established in Belfast, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not where the original distillery was located, was it?
Yeah, so to answer that question, really, you maybe need to go into a bit of Belfast's history. So Belfast is an industrial city. It always has been. There was the shipbuilding, there was the mills, there was different industries there that and Irish whiskey really did play a massive part in Belfast City. There was a number of Irish whiskey distilleries around Belfast City. And the McConnell's distillery, which was called the Cromac Distillery, was one of those distilleries that was built in the 1800s. The brand goes back to 1776, which is when the McConnell's family started the brand itself and started to distill. But the industrial distillery wasn't actually built until John and James, the two brothers, built their Cromac Distillery in the 1800s. But it was a huge distillery, and it played a massive part in the Irish whiskey export market to America. A lot of the whiskey that they were producing, they had to store off-site. So they had a number of bonded warehouses around Belfast City. And so one of those bonded warehouses had the guts of 500,000 gallons of Irish whiskey stored and aging in the warehouse. And that would have all have been bottled and sold to the export market.
But then disaster struck.
Disaster struck, yeah. So one of the biggest disasters that hit McConnell's was the fire that they had in Dunbar Street, and it completely burnt all the whiskey to the ground. You know, they talk about stories where there was whiskey flowing through the streets.
I've heard that
there's
story.
myths and legends about that, but you can imagine 500,000 gallons of whiskey would be incredibly expensive. I think the total value of the loss was around £75,000 back in the early 1900s, which was a lot of money to them. And that would have been what it cost to them, not what they would have sold that whiskey for. So it would have been a lot larger of a loss. They did show resilience, and they came back from that, and they continued to trade right up until whenever Prohibition hit, and Prohibition basically destroyed the entire Irish whiskey market. So they came back from that disaster, but they were hit with an even bigger disaster, and that's what finally meant they closed their doors in the 1930s.
But then McConnell's is still here, or is here again, you could say.
Yeah, so we relaunched the brand back in 2019, and the brand, there's a lot of research put into Irish whiskey in Belfast City, because we are building a distillery here, and there's a number of really quite famous Belfast whiskey brands, and McConnell's is one of them, and it never really left the city. There is still some original product on the shelves in Belfast City. There's also the stunning mirrors that they have, and old memorabilia, where like little ashtrays and trinkets and little jugs and whiskey jars. So there is a big presence of McConnell's in Belfast City. And we didn't want that to get lost further. And looking back on the story of McConnell's, we loved that story, and we wanted to bring it back to Belfast and make sure that the people in Belfast are a part of that.
So if you don't have a distillery yet, there's one being built right now, if I understand correctly, in Belfast. But where's the whiskey coming from right now? Is it made in someone's backyard?
So whiskey is one of those things that, especially Irish whiskey, it's very old. But a lot of the brands are either coming back like we are, or they're brand new. So the distilleries need to make their whiskey, and then they need to age their whiskey for at least 3 years before they can sell it. What whiskey companies do in the meantime is source their whiskey. So our whiskey is sourced from a distillery, Great Northern Distillery, which a lot of whiskey brands would source their whiskey from. And as well, whenever we build our distillery, it will be a malt whiskey distillery. So all of the whiskey that comes from our distillery will be malted whiskey. So we'll always have to source our grain whiskey from another distillery. And that's what a lot of distilleries do. They're either a grain whiskey distillery or they're a malt whiskey distillery, unless you're one of the huge distillery productions like Great Northern that have both a malted distillery and a grain distillery.
And are there any exciting future plans for McConnell's that you can tell us about? Because right now, this is the only whiskey that's on the shelves.
It is, yes.
Are there any fun projects coming up that you can tell us about? Maybe you can't.
Yeah. Well, we do have another expression coming out early in 2022, and it will be finished in a sherry cask. So it will be a sherry blend. We did tease that expression at a Belfast Whisky Festival, and we let the public try what the whiskey's like now. but it will spend a little bit more time in the sherry casks, and that will be decanted and bottled around December time, and it'll be ready for release early next year. So that's an incredibly exciting time for me, because there's a new product coming out that we can talk about, and new expression that brings a whole different character to McConnell's. And then, so when the distillery is opening, we do have plans for some single malts to be released, and it will be 20-year-old malts, 30-year-old malts. We have exciting projects ahead of us.
That indeed sounds very, very exciting. I cannot wait for the beginning of 2022. Looking at Max here. Like a lot of hard work for you as well as a brand ambassador. So I was wondering about one more thing. When we have this beautiful bottle, you can see that it says whiskey with a Y, but McConnell's is an Irish brand, which traditionally, as sort of a resistance towards the Scots, writes whiskey with EY. How is it that McConnell's is written with only a Y?
So it's an interesting story, but it has quite a simple answer, and that is because McConnell's, as I said, was established so long ago, that traditionally, back before the sort of 19th century, Irish whiskey was spelt without an E. All whiskey was spelt without an E. And then whenever Scotch whiskey became very popular and they started to use different methods of distillation other than a pot still, they actually adopted the Kofi still, which is the continuous still. It was a more efficient way of making whiskey. A number of distillers would have added the E in Irish whiskey as nearly an early days marketing tool to show that they are different from the Scottish blend, which uses a different method of distillation. It unfortunately, the introduction of that continuous still meant that Scotch whiskey became more popular because they could produce more of it, and they produced bulk product. A lot of countries like America actually adopted our spelling of whiskey with an E, because the Irish whiskey brands were very popular in America. But unfortunately, with Prohibition, Scotch whiskey really took the forefront, and Scotch became a lot more popular across the world than Irish whiskey did. But we've got loads of room for movement, which is very exciting for me to be a part of. So
definitely.
McConnell's never actually adopted the E in Irish whiskey. They always kept it right up until the mid 1900s. They kept it spelt without the E.
So more of a tradition of an established brand already.
Yeah, well, we wanted to honor the brand as it is. There's no rule in the Irish whiskey GI to say that you have to an E in Irish whiskey. It can be spelt either way. So we felt that we would honour the original brand and the original owners and keep it with tradition.
That does make a lot of sense. So I would like to circle back to you now, because we can talk about McConnell's a lot, but we have you as a very interesting guest here, a very special guest. How do you like to drink your whiskey?
It really depends on how I'm feeling. I'm not I wouldn't be someone who would say I have to drink neat whiskey all the time. There is a time and a place for neat whiskey. I do love cask strength whiskies. I love exploring all the different notes in a whiskey. But I do love a cocktail. I'm quite partial to an Irish whiskey cocktail. I find that especially whenever you use flavours that complement the whiskey, you can have a lot of fun with it and you can explore it a lot more. And also, I don't always bring being a female into it, but when I've introduced other females to Irish whiskey, cocktails has been a really good friend of mine, because they find it easier to approach an Irish whiskey whenever you're adding different flavours and you're making it a more approachable drink, rather than handing them a neat whiskey or a neat spirit, because neat spirits in any form can be quite intimidating, especially if you're not a neat spirit drinker and you're usually drinking wines or lower ABV alcoholic beverages. I find cocktails are a great tool, and I do think that cocktails have changed, and mixology has made it almost like exploring food, that you can explore different spirits that complement the different flavors that go into a cocktail.
Yeah, definitely. That's as a woman who until a couple of years ago definitely did not like whiskey because of its high alcohol volume. I very much understand that. Speaking of women, what is it like for you? Maybe better phrased, the way I've always seen the whiskey world is as a man's world. You know, a lot of old men in suits drinking their whiskey neat from fancy glasses. And then there's you, a young woman who does not necessarily need to drink her whiskey like that. What is it like for you as a woman in the whiskey industry?
There's elements of it that me an advantage, and there's also elements of it where I can find it kind of intimidating. But I have to be completely honest, and to this date have come across people who are, you know, so welcoming in the industry that I work in, which is the Irish whiskey industry. People tend to be a lot more open-minded than maybe I expected them to be or give them the credit for. I think that it means that there's a different angle and a different opinion given to the table whenever you introduce female conversation. I find that maybe I've entered the industry at a really good time and a really progressive time, because I have met really interesting females who would be, you know, who get the question, do you actually drink Irish whiskey? Now, I do get that question a lot. I get, so do you actually drink Irish whiskey? Or, you know, did they employ you because you're a young female? You know, and you do get that question a lot, but that is seldom that you get that question. That's maybe the minority that would have that question for you. So I've been pleasantly surprised. It can be quite intimidating, especially whenever you're going to an event in person, because if you're attending an event as a female and you're in a room full of men, that in itself can be intimidating, especially if it's late night and you're having alcohol. But I do find that a lot of the men in the industry, because it is such a small, youthful industry at the minute, they rally around you and they look after you and they make sure that you feel comfortable. And I haven't yet come across a situation where I have felt that my opinion was underappreciated or that my opinion wasn't valid. And you still also, as a female, no matter what, will come across some unwelcome, you know, attitudes and that aren't very savory at times. But, you know, I think that in any industry, as a female, you come across that. I came from a financial industry, which was also very, very male dominated. But I do find that coming to this industry, my opinion is more valid than it was in my previous industry. So I find that I've actually come into a more open-minded industry and circle of friends in my career.
I'm very happy and quite a bit surprised actually to hear that. So this view that we've got of the men who drink, who sample the whiskey and try it and have an opinion, and the women who do not have a space, that's actually quite outdated if I hear you speaking.
It's one of those things on it. Like, if it's how I approach it. If I was to walk into a room and expect people to be controversial, or if I was to go in and I was to be controversial myself, whereas I actually take it as it comes and I just say it as it is, and I hold my own and I stand my ground with my opinions. So I don't know whether every female, and I'm not speaking for every female in the industry when I'm talking, because you could probably ask me the same question next year and I could tell you I've come across other situations in different areas and maybe in a face-to-face event that I felt uncomfortable in. But for now, if I'm 100% honest, I feel that I have had a really, really good experience with males in the industry and also with females, because the females in the Irish whiskey industry all rally around each other.
Really?
And they all scream and shout for each other. And like a lot of the girls that I have met, especially a few of them in Northern Ireland where I am, they're great and they're fun and they can't wait to see another female in the industry, and they're excited about getting out for events where there can be girls there and we can have some female conversation. So I found a very, very positive experience from it, and I hope that continues.
Yeah, I like to hear that. I like to hear those stories. Also like to hear that, you know, more women in the industry getting together, enjoying themselves, having a good time whilst doing an amazing job. Are there any advantages to being a woman in the whiskey industry as compared to being a man, or big disadvantages possibly?
I feel from my own experience is that I haven't been afraid to put my own angle onto Irish whiskey. So I think maybe there's a pressure if you're a male to maybe drink your whiskey neat and, you know, don't mix your whiskey, don't add water, you know, don't put rocks in it, you know, don't put ice in it, you know, don't shake up a cocktail. Whereas I have just from day one approached whiskey the way I wanted to approach whiskey and the way I felt that as a brand ambassador, my preferences were. And I feel that maybe as a female, now I don't know the answer to this, but maybe as a female, it was easier for me to do that because the expectation was there that I maybe would make a cocktail with it, or I maybe would put something else in it or try something different. And also with being a female is that it's still quite unique to the industry. It's still new. The industry needs females. It needs us. The opportunities are there for females to come in. And also with a palette, because females grew up traditionally around different perfumes and different scents, and you know, we messed around with different flowers and nearly made like flower. I used to make flower soup, you know, have like little daisies and all out the back, and so you were used to different notes and flavors, and you grew up around you know, bacon and all those things that you have all of those memories as a child. And I think that makes your palate, and when you're nosing whiskies, you're more vocal about it, and all the memories that you have in your head, and it just sparks different things. And also I feel at times I just say what I'm tasting. So when I'm trying different whiskies, I'll just say like I'll find a note in there, and I go like, there's sometimes I can get, when you were a kid and you had penicillin and you had that banana sticky penicillin that you had, sometimes you get that, or like or notes that maybe some men would find they didn't want to say out loud, or they were a wee bit more introvert about it. Whereas I find as a female I could just express myself because I didn't care how I looked and how I sounded.
So a bit less bound by the rules, a bit free, more free than men would be. I think it's very, very interesting that you're bringing this up. In a previous episode, we actually discussed a scientific part to this. I like that you're bringing that up as well, that it's a more known thing around the whiskey world.
Well, it is. There's some females that have amazing palates, and they're able to identify things in whiskey, and there's also some very successful females in the industry that are blenders, and there's more distillers coming out, and it's just an amazing thing to see because it validates females, especially with things like flavors, even marketing, even visually. Females have a really interesting input into that, because as a female consumer, we're more inclined to be attracted to things visually, and also to be attracted to the smells, and actually pick up the whiskey and read what's on the bottle and the stories. So it's very important to have a female input in Irish whiskey, in any industry. So it's like anything, like every industry in the world, it's really interesting to see that females are coming out in higher roles and are being part of the industry.
And is that visual aspect that you're talking about, is that the reason why the bottle that we have here has such a pretty shape?
Well, I wish I could say that I had an input to this bottle, but I didn't. This began before I did. So the bottle came first. But it is something that really attracted me to the bottle, to the brand, because it showed that there was a lot of, it's not a traditional bottle. Nope. A lot of thought and effort went into it. And it just shows that the brand takes itself very seriously, and is here to stay. There's stories there that I could go on for hours about why the bottle is shaped as it is.
If you like, you may. We've got plenty of time.
So the bottle itself, this logo here, this brand is is the original McConnell's whiskey brand, and we tried to keep as much of the history on the bottle as we could. We actually tried to make it more historic than it actually is, and one of those stories is down here at the bottom. There's where it says restoring the legend. It used to say extracts of analysis, and this is where there was a medical doctor, medical PhD biology, I think it was, and another guy was an engineer. These three men who were well thought of and obviously well thought of enough to put on a whiskey bottle, had recommended the brand. And one of them being a medical doctor is such an Irish thing to be recommending an Irish whiskey as a doctor. Not that, because I know through working in Irish whiskey, I know a lot of doctors who love a nip of whiskey, but they maybe wouldn't put it on a bottle. So we tried to keep those extracts of analysis on the bottle, but because being one reason, those people don't exist anymore. Secondly, the liquid is not exactly what is in the old bottle, but because we don't know for sure what the old whiskey was. There is no record of what the mash bill was for that whiskey, but we've tried to keep it as close as what we think the whiskey would have been. And then thirdly, you can't really have, for health reasons, a doctor recommending a whiskey on a bottle, so we couldn't put that on there. But as a bit of an honor to that, we shaped the bottle like a penicillin capsule, so it's like a pill capsule, where there's a dead halfway down, or sorry, not even halfway down, slightly further down, like you can imagine, in an overlapping pill capsule. So that's why it's shaped the way it is. And then also at the bottom of the bottle, there's like these little crevets, which I find very interesting too. You can probably, I don't know whether they have that, where you are in the city bars, but some of the old style bars used to have this sort of opaque glass that meant they separated the booths, and that you couldn't see through them, but they didn't block out the light. And if you notice, if you're ever in one of those old style pubs or bars, it's this glass that they use. So we put that on there too. Just it's eye catching, and it draws memories, even though you don't realize it's drawing memories. Obviously, we have then the Belfast Badge that we have here, which is very much, I don't know if you know this, but one of the reasons why Belfast is famous is because they built the Titanic.
I did know that. I pride myself in that knowledge. Yeah.
So the shipbuilding industry, Harland and Wolff, was massive part of Belfast history. So this is actually just a little bit of a nod to the docks and the shipbuilding industry. Mm-hmm. And then if you take off the lid where the cork is, and you see, basically it's the harp of erin that we have here, which is used for a lot of reasons in our country. It's used for a number of reasons, and it's something that is very ingrained in Irish history. And these are the strings of the harp. Just a bit of time and effort has went into it. There's a few people who said that it kind of looks like the harp of erin behind bars, but that's actually not what that's for. That is actually for the strings of the harp and harmony. And it means like harmony in Belfast, because Belfast has a troubled past also. That's what the harp of erin is. It's to represent a harmonious city that Belfast now is. So we've tried to put some stories on there as well about the brothers, John and James, who started the brand, because they are obviously very important. They built the distillery. And then also the fact that we are now restoring the legend that is, the word legend in Belfast, it has many meanings, but the way we mean legend is that the brand really speaks for itself. It's been around for so long and it never actually went away. So it is one of Belfast's biggest legends. We can never know the past 100%. We can only take the truth from the stories that we have and from the research that we have done. So it's always interesting to have a little bit of a story too, because I think stories and legends and myths are one of the things that make Ireland so interesting.
Definitely. I like that it's just a full bottle of stories and history in this sense, and not just a bottle of whiskey. I mean, it's not just a whiskey, but it's far more than a container for the whiskey. And I like that.
I mean, even speaking about females in the industry, Belfast would have been really ahead of its time. It had all of the females working in the milling industry and in the shipbuilding industry, but also in the Irish whiskey industry, because the McConnell family started the brand in the 1700s. But whenever John and James's father died, Their mother, Eleanor McConnell, had 2 young boys. They were very, very young until the 2 boys were of age and they took over the distilling process and built the distillery. Eleanor McConnell was actually listed as a rectifying distiller in the 1800s. So as a female being listed as a rectifying distiller even all those years ago, I find a really interesting part of Belfast history.
So that was in the late 1700s then?
Yeah, so it would have been maybe the
1800s?
early 1800s that she was listed as a rectifying distiller.
So this is just a bit before women started working for like the Industrial Revolution and stuff.
And they played a massive part in the Industrial Revolution. And then even during the wars, females would have worked in the industries too. And we Eleanor McConnell, we call her Mother McConnell because it's just she held the brand, she held the fort while her sons, she waited until her sons were of age, and she also raised them too, which I find brilliant, really exciting part of female. Because as I spoke to you just briefly before I came on, I have a daughter too, and she's 7 years old, and juggling being a mother and working as a full-time working mother is something that I'm really proud of. So I find that this Eleanor McConnell very interesting.
I can imagine. It's very inspirational for working women indeed everywhere, or mothers everywhere, or just women in general, I think.
Yeah, exactly. One of those things too that your palate does mature. You get your palate matures over time, and the more whiskey you try, and the more open-minded you can be about a whiskey. And it also, I personally feel that depending on how I'm feeling or what I've eaten that day, or basically what time of day it is, or how hungry I am at times, I can find a whiskey more palatable than other times. That sometimes that I go to a cask strength whiskey tasting and I really just I just can't do it. I just am not in the mind for it to be doing it. And then there's other times where I really enjoy it and I can stick it out to the very end of all these cask strength whiskeys tastings. So it really depends on how you're feeling. It's like anything as well. It is an alcoholic beverage, so it can, your mood and how you're feeling can really impact how you enjoy the alcohol. But I find that if you are responsible, but not responsible isn't really the right word, respectful to whiskey, and you treat it with respect and you drink it with respect, then you will enjoy your experience with whiskey. I find that sometimes people have said they've had a bad experience with it. It reminds them of maybe their past, or maybe their father drank it, and or maybe they've been through a stage where people haven't respected the spirit. Then they're going to get a negative experience and they'll not go back to it. So it's the best way to introduce someone to Irish whiskey is to respect it and to try and bring them on a journey rather than throw them in at the deep end.
What I think is something you just said reminded me of this. A couple of weeks ago, Max and I went to a friend of ours who had invited a few people outside, and we tried some whiskeys. Everybody brought a few bottles. And then later on, there was one person who joined us a bit later. And at one point he turns to me, because I was driving and it was late. It was Friday night. I'd had a long week. I didn't even feel like trying, I just wanted to have my Coke and sit down and relax. And at one point he turns to me and he goes, "Oh, you don't like whiskey?" I'm like, "No, that's not it. Then why aren't you trying anything?" I'm like, "Well, I'm driving." "Oh, but you could try just a little, you can just try one sip if you like." He was, and it was being very friendly. He was offering me to taste the whiskey that he brought, but I was kind of like, I'm not feeling it. And I think for a lot of people, the whole "I am not feeling it right now" is still something that needs to be, explored.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. And
there's a time. I think
sometimes when you have someone who feels like that, and you're too pushy, then you get resistance.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're respectful of what people have to say or their reasons why they're not trying it, then they're more likely to come back to it at a later date, or maybe even change their mind.
Exactly.
So
that's what I was saying. At one point, our friend wanted to take out a whiskey that specifically that I had said, "Oh, I like that," and he was like, "Oh, I still have my sealed bottle here. Let's open it." I was like, "Next time, we'll do it next time. No, but I want to, give you something that, next time.
Yeah.
And indeed, there is going to be a next time when I'll be super excited to try it together.
Yeah.
And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But it was not that time.
No, just not then, which is totally fine. You're totally allowed to not end up, if you're not feeling it, then you're not feeling it, which is, I'm the same. I'm a brand ambassador and I still have times where I'm not feeling it.
So earlier you talked about cocktails, about complementing a whiskey in a specific way. Would you teach me to make one of these cocktails with McConnell's?
Yes, of course. It's one of the things that I enjoy doing is that we have a number of our signature serves that there was some research done into the different flavors and notes that you get in the whiskey and how they complement the spirit. So, for example, we'll have an Irish coffee in there, which is everyone needs an Irish coffee in their life. And then we also have
I don't like coffee though.
Okay, well, fair enough. But those who are coffee maniacs like myself, I do love an Irish coffee. And old fashioned, which is something we call it Belfast old fashioned, which is a Belfast whiskey, and it has some citrus notes in there, and also the Angostura bitters, which bring out some of the notes, and the demerara sugar, which obviously I definitely get some demerara sugar in the notes in the whiskey. As you said, you find it quite sweet too. And then we also have our Dunbar Street Sour, and so the Dunbar Street Sour is named after where the tragic fire happened, but it's not really named after the fire itself. It's more named after the resilience that the company showed, and so it's a celebration cocktail, and it has some wonderful notes in it that we'll go through in our Instagram video, and it will show you more how those flavors complement the whiskey, especially whenever you try it yourself.
I'm very much looking forward to that. So we will make a special video for Instagram where we make the Dunbar Street cocktail. Very much looking forward to that. As for now, Sarah, thank you so much for talking to us, for giving us all the information, for showing your love for this company and for the whiskey world, the Irish whiskey world specifically. So we talked about this wonderful whiskey, McConnell's Irish whiskey. We talked about its rich history and its surely even richer future. We talked about the whiskey itself. We talked about what it's like to be a woman in the whiskey world, about your experiences, about my experiences. And in general, we just had a really good chat, I think. Thank you so much, Sarah. And hopefully we'll see you soon.